Good morning, everybody, and we are live on the air right now. This video will be simulcast, very likely on YouTube, and also being recorded on audio as well. So here we are. Today is September 30th, and this is September 30th this week. Starting tomorrow, the MLB playoffs starting with the National League Wild Card game and the American League Wild Card game. So since it's October, this is kind of a transition month. You know how in the last, say, 3 or 4 weeks we've been talking about mostly, well, pretty much all about the NFL news. Well, we're not going to talk anymore about that. We're going to include that very little in the next episodes over the next month or so. You know, we'll really talk more football news in November. Maybe we'll squeeze some in now and then, but right now my focus is on October baseball, which usually is some of the best time of the year. You know, so much drama, so much excitement, and you know, the saying is legends are born in October. Also this week, you know, my Capitals, who I'm a fan of, who I talked about in the very first episode. You know, you can go back and you can see me wearing my Stanley Cup Champions hat. Well, they'll be back. They'll be playing the Blues on Wednesday night, the same night as the American League Wild Card game. So right now, this episode we'll talk about the departure of Joe Maddon and what that means for the Cubs and them going forward. So, how shocked was I that Joe Maddon was not coming back? Well, the problem is they lost 10 of their last 12 to close the season out. They went from being right in the wild card race, even having a lead in the wild card race, to falling completely out of it to the point where they're completely eliminated from it. So with the Cubs, I am not surprised Joe Maddon's not coming back. I'm not surprised at all. And this has been the thought pretty much almost for the last year. When they lost that wild card game to the Rockies, they decided they were not going to extend his contract in the off season or during the season. They wanted to see how the season played out. And overall for the Cubs, many people would have considered, for one, the last 3 years, really since they won the World Series. Since they won that World Series, they won 103 games that year. They were considered to be really the next great team in baseball. You know, people had the talk of maybe being a dynasty, potentially. Which again, they won 103 games. They were a young team. That was 3 years ago. And you could say they fell off. They've dropped off pretty much every year since then. And success-wise, like accomplishments and October-wise, absolutely that's the case. They've won one Central title since then. That was 2017, and we didn't know what they were for the first half of the year. They had to get hot in the second half to win the Central. And it wasn't even really close in that series against the Dodgers. They lost in 5 in the NLCS last year. Again, I talked about this a lot last year. The National League, I didn't know what that league was. You know, we talked about how great last year the American League was. The Cubs last year, we thought they were the best team in the National League, certainly record-wise for a long, long time. The Brewers caught them, played the Rockies, lost in a heartbreaking, I think it was 13 innings last year in the wild card game. Their season was over just like that, and here we are again. So throughout the year, and we knew this would be a contract year for Joe Maddon, since had very success. The first 4 years were very, very successful, really, especially the first 2, and then ever since then, obviously the expectations have been very high the entire time. I think they've gotten higher each year. I feel like the pressure's gotten higher and higher each year. Like, for an example, they won the World Series. Now there's pressure for them to do it again, since people are saying, and granted, I don't follow the Cubs organization terribly closely. I've heard some things about them from the outside. You know, I'm not there every day. I'm not a beat writer or anything for the Athletic, MLB.com, or the Chicago Tribune, whatever their newspaper is. But I'm sure the players hear about some things. I'm sure their expectations are high, like 2017, to do it again. Are they as good as they were in 2016? Obviously, the answer was no. In 2018, obviously, they're hoping to rebound from a disappointing National League Championship Series loss. Took a step back, lost the Central, and this year was clearly their year of redemption, and at times they looked like a team that could win the Central. At times they looked like a team that wasn't very good. And we're thinking, what is this team? What is their identity? And really, the National League Central this year is kind of bounced around between the Cardinals, the Brewers, and the Cubs of who's the best team in the division. It was very nearly the Brewers. It became close, and the Cubs just been very inconsistent this year, and we saw how they played the last 2 weeks of the season. Granted, they won a series in St. Louis, but so this is what they end up as. I think they a team that's above 500 that misses the playoffs, and it was time for a change. Really, it was time for a change. And with Maddon, I think he wanted to come back. I remember talking about earlier in the year. I think Joe Maddon was interested in coming back, and then I read various articles. I read articles on The Athletic about is Joe Maddon coming back, and the bottom line is contract's up. He is not coming back, and that is the end of it. So that is the end of the Joe Maddon era in Chicago. Was there any point in time where I thought they might be coming back? On Saturday night, I might have heard some things. Oh, he's going to meet with Theo, so maybe they'll talk about it. Theo Epstein, that is, and they'll think maybe they can reach some sort of agreement to come back for another year or two. Maybe it'll work out, but basically I think I read that a long conversation. At the end, they decided they're not going to. They decided that is it. It's just time to move on. And I think they want to move on when they did, since, again, this question is, will Maddon manage again? Yes. I think it is very likely. I've heard reports right away of where Maddon's going next. It seems very unlikely that he's retiring. I think we'll probably get the call any time now, probably within the next few weeks, whether that's in Philadelphia. I've heard reports of that. In our next video, we'll talk at length about Gabe Kapler as well, so that Philadelphia job could potentially be opened up. You've heard reports of the Padres. That could be a very good job to have, in the Padres are in a very similar situation as what the Cubs were about 5 years ago. They are, with years and years of losing, just not being able to get it right. They're in a very good situation right now, and granted, success the next year. So this is me a little hard to explain, a little hard to put into words. So are the 2020 Padres in better condition to contend than, say, the 2019 Cubs? No. Since if you take the Padres job, maybe it'll be better than the D-backs, who surprise people, finishing in second place. Maybe you are better than the D-backs, but a Dodgers team that just won 106 games, who actually more than the 2017 team, who for long stretches of time people thought were one of the great teams of all time. You're going to have to dethrone the Dodgers, who teams have constantly, and I don't want to go too much on a topic of trying to dethrone the Dodgers, but over the last 7 years, teams have tried to get up to the Dodgers level and have failed and have entered rebuilds, including the San Diego Padres. I mean, we remember 5 years ago, right around the same time Joe Maddon took the job as the Cubs manager out, they tried to find a way to dethrone the Dodgers. It failed miserably. So that is a very good job to have right now. Short term, like in the next year, maybe you do go through some growing pains. Maybe you don't make it to the playoffs, but maybe you're a perennial playoff contender, say, down the road. So the next 3 to 5 years, kind of medium-term range. So that could be a good job to have. There's numerous jobs. I've heard the Mets job might be open up, and I don't know about that right now. We'll find out about that in a few days. He's not going to take the Pirates job. I feel like no one wants that job right now. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised am I that Joe Maddon's not back? I'd say, or how much I was expecting this in a scale of 1 to 10. Say this in other words, I'm going to give myself about an 8. I felt like it was coming, and I knew and all of us knew for the last year or so that it was certainly a possibility, and just the way things ended, I think both sides decided it was time to move on, and this was not like, oh, fireman type of deal or anything. And, there's a good video of it on MLB.com. It's about 2 minutes long. If you go to that Bat app, go to the Cubs-Cardinals game, you'll find a video. All the players, whether it was Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, John Lester, I think those were the main core 4 players over the last, say, 4 or 5 years involved in the success of what the Cubs have become. And they spoke about how they really liked having Joe Maddon as their manager, and really it really was a very successful tenure. I mean, you're the manager who broke the curse of the Billy Goat, one of the great curses in baseball and even in sports history, 108 years. And you were the manager that did that. And Maddon will always be a legend in Chicago, so when they have the 2016 reunions over the years, I know Joe Maddon will be cheered one of the loudest of really anyone. So who will succeed Maddon as the Cubs manager? I don't know yet. I really don't know yet. One report I've heard, and it's very interesting, David Ross, who was the catcher on 2 of those Cubs teams, I think in 15 and 16, so has been managed by Joe Maddon, and guys like Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, just a list of players. Heck, even John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, some of the key figures. Kyle Schwarber, guys who were on all those playoff teams. They know David Ross very well, and they were with him. So if David Ross gets the job of the Cubs manager, I would not be surprised at all, since it's basically played with him a few years ago. So again, we'll have more authority than he was when he's a player. It will be a little bit different. Obviously, you're kind of in charge of the people you just played with, but still, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. That was just a report those are just kind of reports that surfaced yesterday. Could be Joe Girardi, who was from Chicago, played for the Cubs during his career. I think that's a good job to have as of right now, and the job looks good right now. Since the Cubs are still very talented, they still have. This year was considered a down year, so they've had 5 winning seasons in a row. They can turn around. So maybe it is a good job to have. I think it is an appealing job. It's a much more appealing job than, say, what the Pittsburgh Pirates job is. I don't know who wants that, who's going to take it. It's much more. So who to manage the Cubs? I don't know. I'm really going to wait and see who it is. I wouldn't be surprised if it was David Ross, though. I really wouldn't be. And there could be guys who come completely under the radar who I wasn't thinking very much about this year. So who knows? Who it could be? Who has the Cubs job? So it really was quite an era. It really was quite an era. And just, the Cubs, when they got Joe Maddon, was one of the great managerial hirings, really in recent memory. And if you want to learn more about kind of the Joe Maddon Cubs days, I read this book. I bought it about a year and a half ago, and I finished it, I don't know, about a year ago. It's called, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's called The Cubs Way. I believe that's what it's called. It's written by Tom Verducci. So look it up on Amazon, Cubs Books, and you'll find that. It's a great read. I highly recommend reading it. Whether you're a Cubs fan who might be happening to watch this video, or anyone watching this video, I highly recommend this book. It's a great book. It goes into great detail, far more what I talked about, a bit just about what happened to the Cubs in the Joe Maddon era. And it goes deep into depth of that season. Just great book. You learn a lot about Joe Maddon. You learn a lot about really that team and what they did to win that World Series. So, great read. So, Cubs have moved on from Joe Maddon. It'll be interesting to see what the next manager is, and interesting to see what the future of the Cubs is. So, what kind of caused their decline? I thought weaknesses, and I talked about this numerous times when I talked about the Cubs. And we won't go too long into this. I felt like their biggest weakness was, during this era, of the Theo era, was they did a great job of developing hitting. You know, we talked about kind of their core pieces along the way. They had Anthony Rizzo. That was a great find. They found hitting in Kyle Schwarber. Chris Bryant, great pick. Okay, but so they did very well in that department. But in terms of getting their pitching rotation, and as it is right now, that was their biggest weakness. John Lester, that was a great free agent signing. Yet, is in his mid-30s, is on decline right now. Kyle Hendricks, that was a very good move. You could technically call him homegrown. Was one of the first players, a very under-the-radar player found in the Theo era, when they were early in the rebuild. As part of a trade when he was in low level in the minors. Then go on to Cole Hamels, Yu Darvish, Jose Quintana. That was their rotation this year for the most part. Throughout this period of time, in the last 5 years, they never developed any starting pitching. And I felt like that has been somewhat of a question mark during this entire time. Sure, it was spectacular the year they won the World Series, but each and every year, they've had an older starting pitching rotation that they've not been able to figure out. You know, they've not really had a full-time closer the last 2 years. Since they let Wade Davis go, which looks great now. Poorly's pitching Colorado. And so again, things that they thought they had going for them, they didn't. I think the bullpen's been a weakness for them over the last couple of years, certainly at times. Same thing with starting pitching. It's an older rotation. And their farm system, for the most part, has really gotten weaker. Really, in the last 5 years, I feel like it's gotten weaker and weaker every year. And granted, it worked great out for them. It produced a lot of players that were part of that World Series team. But just whatever it was, they just couldn't sustain the success that they did right away. And there's still more time. I feel like there is more time over the next couple of years. I mean, sure, they can win another World Series with another manager. But they're different. The feeling around Chicago is different than what it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago. The optimism will never be as high as what it was, say, 3 years ago when they won the World Series. So it's a new era, new manager. It'll be interesting to see what the roster looks like this offseason. They have their deal with WGN and I think CSN or NBC Sports Chicago has expired. They're kind of getting their own network, kind of like the Dodgers have with Sportsnet LA. Kind of what the Yankees have with Yes, they're kind of getting their own kind of new network that will debut, so they'll get a lot of money from that. So that will be interesting. So next year's gonna be different. It's gonna be a new look, but I'm looking forward to it. Kind of the new model of the Cubs. So we'll see what happens. But just a different era going on. Well, so thank you for listening to this episode. And up next we'll talk about Gabe Kapler and the Phillies, and obviously later this week we'll talk about the playoffs. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you shortly with the next episode.